Imagine looking out across the gray expanse of the West Sea and seeing a steel mountain rising 50 meters out of the water. It's a massive silent intruder, the size of a city block, sitting in a zone where no such structure should exist. For years, the official line from Beijing was simple. It's just a fish farm, a private venture for raising seafood. But if you look closer, you won't see nets or scales. Instead, you see a helipad, high-speed interceptor boats, and professional divers. It looked less like a fishery and more like a fortress, a gray zone outpost designed to slowly claim the ocean for China, one steel beam at a time. South Korea spent years demanding its removal, only to be met with a diplomatic shrug. Then, suddenly, the tugboats appeared. After months of high-level tension and a high-stakes presidential summit, this massive, permanent structure is finally being towed away. At first glance, it feels like a major breakthrough, a rare moment where Beijing blinked first in a territorial dispute. Two other massive structures remain firmly rooted in the seabed. The order to move the rig came the very same day Donald Trump threatened South Korea with new, aggressive trade tariffs. China insists this is merely a private business decision and has nothing to do with government pressure. Yet that instantaneous shift from stubborn defiance to a sudden withdrawal leaves us with a nagging question. Is this a genuine gesture of peace or a calculated strategic lure to pull Seoul into Beijing's orbit while its alliance with Washington hits a rocky patch? One structure is moving, but the real game in the West Sea is only just beginning. That image has been stuck in my head all week. A steel mountain in the middle of the ocean. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel or a dystopian film, doesn't it?
Yes.
The idea that you could be on a boat, surrounded by nothing but gray waves and fog, and suddenly this city block just looms out of the mist.
It is a striking visual, but what's even more striking is the reality of what that steel represents. It's not just a physical object, it's a statement.
Right.
When we talk about maritime disputes, we usually think of ships passing in the night, maybe some water cannons or lines drawn on a digital map. We don't usually think of permanent 50-meter-tall steel islands anchored to the seabed in contested waters.
And that's what threw me when I first started digging into this. I thought, okay, they moved an oil rig, but then you look at the details and it's not just an oil rig, it's this hybrid thing. It's part fortress, part factory, part diplomatic pawn. And the fact that it just disappeared, or started moving, I should say, that feels significant.
It is incredibly significant, but maybe not for the reasons the headlines are suggesting. The headlines are screaming, victory for diplomacy, or China backs down.
Yeah, that's the simple take.
But if you zoom out, and that's what we need to do today, you see a very different picture. We're witnessing a collision of three massive forces here.
Right. We're not just talking about fishing rights or some obscure maritime boundary.
Far from it. First, you have the concept of gray zone tactics. This is the art of claiming territory without ever firing a shot, without ever triggering a war. It's about blurring the lines between civilian and military so effectively that your opponent doesn't know how to respond.
Yeah, which explains the whole fish farm label. It's the perfect cover.
Second, there's what you could call industrial supremacy. We need to talk about the sheer engineering might require to build these things. This isn't just welding some metal together. This is state-of-the-art, deep-sea technology that very few nations on Earth possess. The ability to build these mountains is, in itself, a weapon.
A form of power projection just by existing. And the third force?
High-stakes diplomacy. The 4D chess game between Beijing, Seoul, and Washington. The timing of this removal, coinciding exactly with threats from the U.S., is the key to unlocking the whole mystery.
That's the hook for me. The timing is just too perfect. It makes you realize that this private business decision to move a rig might actually be one of the most sophisticated geopolitical maneuvers we've seen in years.
Right. We're not just looking at coordinates on a map. We're looking at how a private business decision might actually be a geopolitical weapon.
To really understand what this thing was doing out there and what it felt like to be near it, I want to bring in a narrative I found. This isn't from a politician or a general. This is from the ground level, or the sea level, I suppose. I've been following the recent developments in the Yellow Sea closely, and it's fascinating how a massive slab of steel and engineering can tell us so much about the silent tectonic shifts in global power. As someone who analyzes these geopolitical movements for my channel, I've gathered a few perspectives, some from whispers in the industry, others from digital footprints left by those on the front lines. Here are 3 stories that capture the human and strategic pulse of this event. I heard about an engineer named Zhang, a man who spent his entire career in the shipyards of Dalian, contributing to what many call the industrial cult of the East. To Zhang, the massive platform towed into the Provisional Measures Zone wasn't just a political chess piece. It was a testament to industrial supremacy. Imagine the sheer scale, thousands of tons of reinforced steel, a self-sustaining island of technology capable of defying the deep sea. For men like Zhang, building these structures is a secular religion. When he looks at the horizon, he doesn't see a gray zone tactic. He sees the undeniable physical reality of China's capacity to reshape the environment. I saw a post online where a worker from his team described the feeling of standing on that deck miles from the coast. It's a feeling of absolute permanence. It's this industrial might that serves as the hard evidence of a shift in the world order, where the ability to build becomes the ability to govern. Reading about Zhang's pride, I can't help but feel the weight of that steel. It's a visceral reminder that technological dominance isn't just an abstract concept. It's something you can touch, and it's something that stays. The ability to build becomes the ability to govern. It's such a heavy concept. For engineer Zhang, this is about pride. It's about conquering the ocean. But from where you sit, looking at the strategic map, that physical permanence is actually a tactic, isn't it?
It is the defining tactic of our time in the maritime domain. We call this institutional efficacy. It's a bit of an academic term, but let's break it down. Historically, if you wanted to claim territory, you planted a flag or you built a military base. But that's provocative. That starts wars.
Right. If you land a platoon of Marines on an island, everyone knows what that means. There's no ambiguity there.
Exactly. But what if you build a business? What if you tow a massive structure out there and say, this is just for the economy. We're just raising fish to feed our people. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. You aren't invading, you're developing. And if you can keep that structure there, supply it, rotate crews, and manage the waters around it, you are effectively governing that space. You are proving that your state capacity extends to that coordinate.
But let's be real here. The official line is that these are fish farms, specifically deep-sea aquaculture cages. They call them Shenlen 1 and Shenlen 2. And the one that was just moved, the management platform, was officially a converted oil rig, the Atlantic Amsterdam. But come on, a fish farm? I've seen fish farms. They are nets and buoys. Why does a fish farm need a helipad?
Shit. And it's where the gray zone becomes a trap. Yes, technically, they might be raising salmon or yellow croaker in the cages below, but look at the infrastructure above the waterline. You mentioned the helipad.
Right.
That allows for rapid rotation of personnel or potentially the landing of surveillance drones.
And the boats. These aren't your average fishing trawlers.
That's even more telling. These platforms are often flanked by high-speed interceptor boats. These aren't for hauling in nets. These are sleek, fast vessels designed to chase down other ships. And the personnel. You aren't just seeing fishermen and rain slickers. You see professional divers. You see coordinated shifts.
So it's a fortress disguised as a grocery store.
Yes. It creates a civilian-military dual-use dilemma. By placing a structure labeled civilian in the Provisional Measures Zone, the PMZ China forces South Korea into a bind.
Let's pause on the PMZ for a second. For listeners who aren't maritime lawyers, what exactly is this zone?
Sure. Think of the PMZ as a geopolitical Wild West. It's an area of the sea where the exclusive economic zones, the EEZs, of China and South Korea overlap.
So they both claim it.
They haven't agreed on a final boundary yet. So they set up this zone where, theoretically, both countries can fish. But neither is supposed to establish permanent control or build permanent structures without consultation.
So it's supposed to be shared space, a neutral zone.
Right. But by dropping a steel mountain into it, China is physically occupying that neutral space. And here's the trap. If South Korea wants to remove it, what do? Do they send a Navy destroyer?
If they do, they look like maniacs. It's terrible optics. Why are you threatening our poor fishermen with a warship?
Exactly. You don't send a destroyer to deal with a fish farm. You send the Coast Guard, or you send bureaucrats to file a complaint. The moment South Korea treats this as a civil matter, a regulatory issue rather than a military invasion, they have lost.
They've already accepted the premise.
They have. They've accepted the premise that China has the right to be there, and it's just a matter of permits.
That is incredibly frustrating. It's like someone pitching a tent in your front yard, but if you call the police, they say, it's just a tent, settle it in civil court. Meanwhile, the tent turns into a house.
And the people inside the house are armed. We need to talk about who is actually on these structures. We've heard the term maritime militia thrown around. This isn't just a loose collection of patriotic fishermen.
I've heard this term little blue men, right? Like the little green men in Crimea.
The sources we analyzed talk about the institutionalization of these militias. These are fishing vessels and crews that are integrated into the state security apparatus. They receive training from the PLA, the People's Liberation Army or the China Coast Guard, they get fuel subsidies specifically to operate in disputed waters.
So they are paid to be there. They aren't fishing for profit. They are fishing for sovereignty.
Correct. They operate in ambiguity. In peacetime, they fish. But in a crisis or even just day-to-day operations, they act as a sensor network. They report foreign ship movements. They can swarm and harass other vessels.
And these massive platforms, the Shenlan rigs and the management platform, they act as the motherships for this militia.
The motherships. Small fishing boats have limited range. They need fuel, fresh water, food, and a place to rest.
Right.
If you have a massive permanent platform in the middle of the ocean, these militia boats can dock there. It extends their loiter time. They can stay out there for weeks or months, effectively blockading the area.
It creates a permanent presence. It's not just a ship passing through. It's a neighborhood. Radical. I remember reading about a specific incident involving a South Korean research vessel, the Onuri.
Yes, this is a perfect example of how this works in practice. The Onuri is a civilian research vessel. It was in the PMZ, legitimately conducting environmental surveys. Suddenly, it was swarmed.
Swarmed by whom? The Chinese Navy?
No, by the China Coast Guard and these civilian vessels. It turned into a 15-hour standoff. For 15 hours, this research crew is surrounded, harassed, blocked from doing their work.
That must be terrifying. You're out in the open ocean, help is hours away, and you have these ships circling you, cutting across your bow. It's pure intimidation.
The data is staggering. The sources indicate that Chinese forces intercepted South Korean monitoring attempts 27 out of 135 times.
Wow.
That's nearly a 20% blockage rate. That implies a high degree of command and control. Get that kind of consistent interception by accident. You need radar nation, and you need a hub. These platforms are the hub.
So even though they removed the management platform on January 27th, the one that looked like an oil rig, that doesn't mean the network is gone.
The Shenlan 1 and Shenlan 2 cages remain. The 13 observation buoys remain.
Wait, observation buoys, I missed that in the intro. What are those doing?
These aren't your standard channel markers. These are sophisticated data collection nodes. They measure currents, salinity, and water temperature, which is crucial for submarine warfare, by the way.
How so?
Sound travels differently depending on water density and temperature. If you know the water better than the enemy, your submarines can hide better. You can find thermal layers to mask your acoustic signature.
So the fish farm is gathering submarine warfare data.
And that data has already been gathered. The removal of one platform doesn't erase the terabytes of information they've sent back to the mainland. They have mapped the seabed. They have tracked the currents. They have monitored South Korean naval response times. The institutional efficacy has already been achieved.
It really emphasizes that state capacity isn't just about laws. It's about physics. It's about what you can put in the water and keep there. Which brings us to the engine behind all this. You can't have a gray zone strategy of this magnitude without an industrial base that borders on the miraculous.
Absolutely. Engineer Zhang isn't just building a tactic, he's building a machine. And that leads us to our next perspective.
There's another story I came across, a narrative of a young officer in the Maritime Surveillance Bureau who views sovereignty not as a sudden conquest, but as a maritime pulse. Try to imagine the strategic patience required for this. He sees the deployment of these platforms as a way to redefine state capacity without ever firing a shot. It's the gray zone in action, a civilian claimed structure that subtly stretches the boundaries of governance. In his world, the goal isn't a military confrontation, it's the quiet normalization of presence. I saw a discussion among maritime analysts suggesting that even when a structure is moved, the institutional efficacy remains. The data has been gathered, the precedent has been set, and the boundary has been nudged. It's a sophisticated game of gradual sovereignty. When I look at this from a neutral perspective, it feels unsettlingly clinical. It's a reminder that modern power isn't always about the loudest explosion. Sometimes it's about who can occupy a space long enough to make the world forget it was ever disputed. It makes me realize how fragile our definitions of territory truly are. That image of the maritime pulse, like a heartbeat in the ocean, it's poetic, but it's also kind of ominous. It implies something living, something that doesn't stop. But a heartbeat needs a heart. It needs a power source.
It does.
And in this case, that power source is this massive industrial engine back on the mainland.
We need to pivot from the tactics of the officer to the tools he is given. This brings us to a concept called Shi Chongbai.
Shishongbai, too.
Roughly, it means the worship of industry or industrial supremacy. It's a cultural and political mindset in China that views heavy industry shipbuilding, steel, massive infrastructure, not just as economics, but as the core of national dignity and power.
So it's a source of national pride.
It's more than pride.
Yeah.
China views its ability to fabricate these massive platforms as physical proof that their system is superior.
It's the "we can build things you can't even imagine" argument.
And they are right. We aren't talking about welding a few pipes together. Let's look at the specs of what we are actually dealing with out there. Take the Deep Sea #1 energy station as the prime example. This is the class of engineering we are seeing. This thing has a displacement of over 100,000 tons.
100,000 tons. Give me a comparison. What does that look like?
To give you a sense of scale, a fully loaded U.S. Nimitz-class aircraft carrier weighs about 100,000 tons. So imagine an aircraft carrier, but instead of being a flat deck for planes, it's a towering lattice of steel, drilling equipment, and processing plants standing vertically in the water.
That is just, it's massive, and it's just sitting there, anchored.
Sitting there in ultra-deep water. It's designed for a lifespan of 30 years without dry docking.
Wait, 30 years? I can't even keep my car running for 10 years without a major overhaul, and this thing is in salt water.
Salt water, high winds, corrosive spray. Think about the maintenance required for a ship. You have to scrape the barnacles, paint the hull, check for rust. Usually you haul a ship out of the water every few years. These platforms are designed to stay out there fighting the ocean for 3 decades continuously. Since its commission, Deep Sea #1 has survived 6 typhoons.
6 typhoons? I mean, most ships run away from typhoons. This thing just takes it on the chin.
It has to. It can't move. It's designed to withstand once-in-a-century storms. But the real engineering marvel, and this is where I want to geek out for a second, is the legs.
The legs. You mean the columns holding it up?
Yes. They utilized a cruciform column design. This was a world first.
Explain that to me like I'm 5. Why is the shape of the leg so important?
Okay, imagine you are carrying a large tray of soup. If the tray is heavy and you are walking on a rocking boat, the soup sloshes around.
Right.
That sloshing shifts the weight, and it makes it very hard to keep your balance.
Yeah, the center of gravity goes crazy.
Now imagine the soup is thousands of tons of condensate ultralight oil. On a normal rig, you store that oil in a separate tank or a ship comes to pick it up. But for Deep Sea #1, to make it efficient, they wanted to store the oil inside the legs of the rig itself.
Whoa, so the legs of the table are also the storage tanks? That seems risky.
Exactly. But if you have huge hollow legs filled with liquid and a typhoon hits, that liquid is going to slosh with massive force. It's called the free surface effect. It could capsize the rig.
That.
They engineer this cruciform internal structure, basically a cross shape inside the columns that acts as a baffle. It breaks up the wave inside the leg. It stops the liquid from sloshing violently, maintaining stability even in rough seas.
That is actually incredibly clever. It solves the storage problem and the stability problem at the same time.
It's brilliant engineering. And it allows the platform to function as a floating production storage and offloading unit, an FPSO, even in ultra-deep waters. They don't need a pipeline running back to shore immediately. They can process and store it right there.
And this isn't just for show. I mean, the industrial cult might love the engineering, but the state loves the money, right?
It creates immense economic throughput. We are talking about the blue economy. China's gross ocean product, or GOP, has surpassed 10 trillion yuan. These platforms are mobile factories. Deep Sea #1 produces 3 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year.
How much is that in real terms?
That's enough to supply 10 million families.
10 million families from one rig. So when that young officer sees the maritime pulse, he's also seeing a flow of cash and energy that makes the region dependent on this infrastructure.
And that dependency is strategic. If you rely on the gas coming from these waters, you are less likely to fight over who owns the waters. But there is one more piece of hardware we have to mention, the Mengtiang.
The Dream. I saw a picture of this. It looks like a cruise ship mixed with a drilling rig.
It's a drilling vessel commissioned recently. And the spec that matters here is depth. It can drill up to 15,250 meters deep.
15,000 meters. And how deep is the deepest part of the ocean?
The Mariana Trench is about 11,000 meters. So this ship can drill through the bottom of the deepest trench on Earth and keep going another 4 kilometers into the crust. It's basically a needle that can pierce the planet anywhere.
That is just mind-boggling.
And here's the civil-military fusion aspect.
Yeah.
The shipyard that builds these CIMC Raffles is the same entity building the fishery platforms and the energy platforms. The technology is dual use. The same dynamic positioning system that keeps a drilling rig steady in a typhoon can keep a surveillance outpost steady in a disputed zone.
So the ability to build it is the deterrent. It sends a message. We can build islands faster than you can build ships to stop us.
It creates an asymmetry. South Korea has a capable navy, but they don't have this level of deep-sea industrial mobilization. They considered building an aircraft carrier, but the legislature rejected it as too expensive. Meanwhile, China is churning out these 100,000-ton platforms like they're assembly line cars.
But we are looking at a disparity in the sheer ability to manipulate the physical world. So we have the tactics, the gray zone, we have the muscle, the industrial capacity. If you have the strength and you have the spot and you have the fish farm excuse working, why pack up the management platform and leave on January 27th?
That brings us to the third force, the diplomatic pivot. And this is where the game gets incredibly subtle. This wasn't a retreat, it was a move on a different board.
Right. Let's look at the strategy behind the retreat. I have one last narrative to share that really frames this. Finally, I want to tell you about a perspective I encountered regarding the partial concession, the decision to move the platform. It's easy to see it as a retreat, but seasoned diplomats in the region see it as a calculated, result-oriented maneuver. Imagine a seasoned grandmaster in a game of Go. They sacrifice a stone to secure the board. By moving the structure after 10 months of tension, the narrative shifts from aggression to cooperation. It creates a specific geopolitical vacuum, a breathing space for South Korea. I read an analysis suggesting this move was designed to signal that Asian stability can be managed internally without the shadow of Western security guarantees. It's an invitation to pivot toward a collective regional future. I must admit, when I first read about the relocation, I felt a sense of relief, a hope for de-escalation. But as a commentator, I also see the sharpness behind the smile. It's a diplomatic masterstroke that tests the resolve of alliances. It's a reminder that in the theater of high-stakes diplomacy, a step back is often the most aggressive move of all, aimed at winning the heart of a neighbor while keeping the ultimate goal in sight. That analogy of the grandmaster playing Go, I want to dig into that because in chess, you sacrifice a piece to kill the king. But Go is different, isn't it?
Go, or Waiki in Chinese, is about surrounding territory. It's about patience. Sometimes you give up a stone, you let the opponent capture it, because it allows you to secure a much larger area of the board elsewhere. It's about influence, not just destruction.
So in this case, the stone being sacrificed is the management platform.
Exactly. And to understand why they sacrificed it now, we have to look at the timeline. You mentioned in the intro that the timing was suspicious. It's more than suspicious. It's pivotal.
Lay it out for us.
Okay. On January 27, 2026, China officially announces the removal of the management platform. This was the most visible, the most militarized-looking structure of the three. It was the one South Korea was screaming about the loudest.
And on that exact same day,
on that very same day, Donald Trump threatened new, aggressive trade tariffs on South Korea.
Wow. The exact same day. Talk about a split-screen moment. You open the newspaper in Seoul, and on the left page, the Americans are threatening to wreck your economy. On the right page, the Chinese are saying, hey, we removed that thing you didn't like, let's be friends.
It creates a vivid, undeniable contrast for the South Korean public and, more importantly, for President Lee Jae-myung.
We need to talk about President Lee. He's in a tough spot.
Tough spot is an understatement. President Lee is a progressive. His political base generally prefers engagement with North Korea and a more balanced relationship with China. He wants to pivot away from the hawkish, exclusively U.S.-aligned stance of his predecessor.
He wants a more transactional, pragmatic relationship with Beijing.
Yes, but he's hamstrung by his own people.
Completely. The South Korean public is furious with China. Surveys show about 66% of South Koreans hold an unfavorable view of China. They are angry about illegal fishing, they are angry about the fine dust pollution blowing over from Chinese factories, and they're angry about these structures in the West Sea.
So Lee can't just be friends with China. He'd get crucified in the polls.
Exactly. He needs a win. He needs to show his voters that his diplomatic approach works. If he just cozies up to Beijing while they are building fortresses in South Korean waters, he looks weak. He looks like a puppet.
So Beijing hands him a win.
They gift wrap it.
They tow away the management platform. Now, Lee can go back to his voters and say, see, the Americans are threatening us with tariffs, but my diplomacy with China yielded results. We got them to back down without firing a shot.
It validates his strategy. It makes the anti-American pivot seem rational, not just ideological.
It's a result-oriented maneuver. Beijing is saying, look, we can work together. We can solve Asian problems between Asians. You don't need the Americans telling you what to do. In fact, the Americans are the ones hurting you right now.
It's incredibly manipulative, but also brilliant.
It's designed to drive a wedge. It promotes collective Asian stability without Western interference. It's classic Sun Tzu, build a golden bridge for your enemy to retreat across. In this case, The bridge leads away from Washington and towards Beijing.
And there's always but we have to go back to the partial concession. They didn't clear the board, did they?
No. And this is why the Go analogy is so perfect. They sacrificed one stone, the management platform. But Shenlan 1 and Shenlan 2, the massive deep-sea cages, remain in the Provisional Measures Zone.
So the fish farms are still there, the buoys are still there, the surveillance network is still active.
Yes. And because the management platform was the most controversial-looking one, because it looked like an oil rig, its removal lowers the temperature. It de-escalates the situation just enough to make South Korea feel safe. It sucks the oxygen out of the room for the hawks who want a stronger U.S. naval presence.
It effectively neutralizes the argument for bringing in American destroyers. If the problem is solved, why escalate?
It's a calculated strategic lure. They give up the symbol of aggression, which was the rig, but they keep the substance of occupation, which is the cages and the buoys. And by the time anyone realizes that the fish farms are actually just as capable of surveillance as the rig was, the moment has passed. The political will to fight is gone.
And South Korea knows the economic stakes of pushing too hard. They remember CID.
That is a scar on the South Korean psyche. In 2017, when Seoul installed the U.S. Tate missile defense system, Beijing retaliated with brutal economic coercion. Tourism froze overnight. K-pop concerts were canceled. Lotte Mart stores in China were shut down for fire safety violations.
It cost them billions.
Seoul knows that Beijing has the power to crush its economy. President Lee knows this. This concession allows him to save face domestically without risking another economic war. It's the path of least resistance.
And the cherry on top, China still denies the government had anything to do with this.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Go Jae-kun insisted that the removal was purely a business decision by the enterprise.
We're just moving our office here, Michael.
By framing it as a business decision, they maintained the denial. If they admitted it was a government order to remove it, they would be implicitly admitting that the government put it there in the first place.
Which would be an admission of territorial encroachment.
Right. By calling it business, they keep the legal ambiguity alive. They can say, the company decided the fish weren't biting there, so they moved.
It's maddeningly clever. It preserves the gray zone status quo even while physically altering it.
It allows them to do it again. If it's just business, maybe the business decides to move back next year. Or maybe they build Shenlan 3.
Here. We started with a steel mountain in the fog. We realized that this mountain wasn't just a rig, it was a statement of industrial power built by a nation that worships Xi Chongbai. We saw how that power was used as a pawn in a gray zone chess game, creating a fortress disguised as a fish farm. And finally, we watched as that pawn was sacrificed by a diplomatic grandmaster to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States.
The structure is gone, or moving, but the capability remains. China has proved it can place a city block in the ocean, hold it for years against protest, and remove it only when it serves a strategic purpose. The industrial efficacy hasn't gone anywhere. The shipyards are still there. The engineers like Zhang are still there.
It really changes how you look at the ocean. It's not just water anymore. It's a construction site for a new world order.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave with you. We focus today on the one structure that left, but we should be looking at the two that stayed. If the management platform was the sacrifice stone in this game of Go, then the remaining structures are the anchors. The real question isn't why China left, but whether they've already normalized the presence of the others so thoroughly that we've stopped asking why they are there in the first place.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.